Attention, soldiers, you are now entering the war zone. Please keep close to your compatriots and have your weapons at the ready. If you would like to skip the introduction, please fast forward to about 7.5 minutes. And now, poets at war.
Once, there were 4 children, whose names were Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy.
Suppose I'm writing a novel. I write, Mary laid down her book. Next moment came a knock at the door. For Mary, who's got to live in the imaginary time of the story, there's no interval between putting down the book and hearing the knock. But I, her creator, between writing the first part of that sentence and the second, may have gone out for an hour's walk and spent the whole hour thinking about Mary.
We make things by the law in which we are made. We create because we are created.
In a hole in the ground, there lived a hobbit.
One ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all in the darkness bind them.
Tolkien and Lewis, both in their way, lifted me out of this world to show me a thundering beauty. And when I read the last sentence and came tumbling back to earth, I could still hear the peal. I hear it to this day. God allowed those stories to lift the veil on the imaginary world to show me the real world behind it, which ended up being, in the end, the one I was already in. The real world, at least in part, isn't out there somewhere, nor is it in my mind. It's here, right under my feet, all around me. Tolkien and Lewis held the fabric of Narnia or Middle-earth in one hand and clutched our world in the other, building a bridge across which we could set out for perilous realms and yet return safely with some of the beauty we found there.
My first and last philosophy, that which I believe in with unbroken certainty, I learnt in the nursery. I generally learnt it from a nurse, that is, from the solemn and star-appointed priestess at once of democracy and tradition. The things I believed most then, the things I believe most now, are the things called fairy tales.
We live in a moment that's unlike any other moment, a moment of bizarre tyranny, a moment of overreach.
I was nearly torn apart by a crazy doctor.
A moment of fear. It's like, and how are we living? How are we standing up in this moment?
I was made a slave by a bunch of mangy pirates.
Are we full of joy? Like, are we characters who are full of joy and unafraid?
I'm eaten. Got that? Eaten by a fire-breathing dragon. And not to mention being tossed, squashed, and scared practically to death.
It's like, how do we image God in this particular narrative in which we've been placed, in this chapter? And we get trained for that by reading about Sam and Frodo and Aragorn and Gandalf, and reading, Charlotte's Web and Animal Farm, and reading about Prince Caspian. Like, when you're little, you read those things and you read stories when you're older, and it reinforces what is the courageous action of a character in this moment.
Yet you stand before me.
Well, yeah.
Think, boy. What kind of an adventure would you have had if I brought you here with a turn of the page?
I wept bitterly, and then I said to myself, when everything happens quite miserably, then He sends help. I have always read so. People must first of all suffer a great deal before they can bring anything to accomplishment.
God, who at various times and in various ways spoke in time past to the fathers by the prophets, has in these last days spoken to us by His Son, whom He has appointed heir of all things, through whom also He made the worlds.
For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. For the earnest expectation of the creation eagerly waits for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of Him who subjected it in hope, because the creation itself also will be delivered from the bondage of corruption into the glorious liberty of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation groans and labors with birth pangs together until now. Not only that, but we also who have the first fruits of the Spirit, even we ourselves, groan within ourselves, eagerly waiting for the adoption, the redemption of our body.
minstrel boy to the war is gone. In the ranks of death you'll find him. His father's sword he had girded on, and his wild harp slung behind him. God of song, said the warrior bard, though all the world betray thee, one sword at least thy right shall guard, one faithful harp shall praise thee. The minstrel fell, but the foeman's chain could not bring that proud soul under. The harp he loved ne'er spoke again, for he tore its cords asunder, and said, no chain shall sully thee, thou soul of love and bravery. Thy songs were made for the pure and free, they shall never sound in slavery. The chains upon the people came, and they gave away their freedom. No prophets left, they then grew lame, they accepted their false kingdom. But one young man saw the minstrel boy, and he took up the shredded strings, and with great love remade with joy the sacred tool for truth to sing.
Did you hear what she said or no?
No.
No, I didn't.
She said because the Great Depression was awesome for cooking. Anyway.
Was awesome for cooking?
Yes, they came up with a bunch of stuff to do with nothing. You know?
Yeah.
So I'd say
Fair enough.
I'd say that's better than the opulence of the late 50s. And the gelatin.
Oh, yeah.
And the mayonnaise.
Yeah, the 50s are the period where the romanticization of it, whatever that word is, makes me the most upset, because it was not. It was
Probably not
marginally better than what we have now, but only in the way that stage 3 cancer is better than stage 4 cancer.
I'm gonna have a few points, but they're not gonna be really helpful, I don't think.
It's okay.
To the discussion, but we'll see what happens.
Well, as far as 50s go, and I guess the conversation's technically started as far as I'm concerned.
Behold.
The 50s are a really good example of romanticization, however you want to say it. I think that honestly the best parts of what's it called? The best parts of the 1950s were what made
Mid-century America.
Yeah, well, the best parts were what made that period so romanticized, and I think the biggest thing in it would, quite frankly, be the origins of rock and roll, coming out of the jazz movement. I think that there's more in the area of music and the radio and the television and the boom of that ends up turning into this weird idealization of middle America, Leave It to Beaver, et cetera, et cetera. I think that this happens in a lot of time periods, but I think the 1950s are a really big example of it. Each time period kind of gets idealized for its own reason, as far as I can tell. I can't find a whole lot of universal reasons, but I feel like there has to be some universal reasons. And so, like, that's kind of what I'm trying to drive at and pinpoint. But I think you can't separate the 1950s, the 1960s, and the 1970s until disco killed it from pop music. I don't think that you can separate it from popular music. Like that was
Okay.
that's what drove the 50s, 60s, 70s.
Yeah. So
And it was still
what were
powerful
the-
in through the 90s, I would say. It was still very powerful through the 90s. But like I think it started to die with disco.
So what popular music are you talking about?
I'm
'Cause
talking
I am-
about culturally popular music. I'm talking about music that was played so much just everywhere you went that it became a major industry, because it was an industry before the 1950s, but it was not a major industry until the transistor radio made it super cheap to have a radio and be able to take it wherever, but your basic batteries and that sort of a thing. And then you start getting into physical formats with records, into cassettes, into CDs, and blah blah blah. But I think that the industry, like the money, was the thing that fueled the fire, but Woodstock was like the big peak, right? So we because we're so close to it, can separate 50s, 60s, 70s. I think that whole period is going to get mashed together in another 50 years. And it's going to be looked at as the Beatles, Elvis Presley. It's going to be looked at as and it's going to be looked at as like the very tail end of that whole thing will basically be Kurt Cobain, in the 90s. And then it slides off into weirdness, right? I think that 20th century music will be a thing in 200 years that is going to be looked at as a major period in music development.
Do you think there's going to be a separation between early 20th century music and late 20th century music, and have it split at 50s? Because you also have before that Frank Sinatra, Ella Fitzgerald, Bing Crosby, and all that big band sound.
Only in the same way that the 19th century, early and late. Like think to yourself what late 19th century music sounded like versus early 19th century music. I can distinguish a difference, but it's almost just two difference. Like it's I can understand the difference between the two, but and kind of pinpoint what they were, but like I can't tell you where the big changes in the movement were. You know what you see what I'm saying? Like, because that was all sheet music. It was a whole other thing, right?
And it could just be that, as you said, we're too close to the situation to be able to actually understand that they're not truly terribly distinguishable. But it seems like there's a big difference between Frank Sinatra singing "I Get No Kick from Champagne,"
right,
and the Beatles singing "She Loves Me,"
huge revolution, and
giant,
most of
big
that
difference,
right?
And it all happens right there in like the 50s, 60s era. It's a pretty big shift.
Yo, it's huge. It's huge. And that's why I'm pointing to the 50s. The 50s changed the way people looked at teenagers. It changed the way people thought about like rebellion of teenagers amongst the family. It changed just all kinds of cultural things. And it was a huge, the biggest development, I think, in the positive from a cultural, like sociological aspect, was a ton of middle America that had never dealt with the Negro population in any way, shape, or form was given something other than the absolute crazy racist friends of theirs to go, oh, these cats are cool. You know what I mean? Like, as white as dumb as that sounds, that's basically what happened. I think that there is almost no musician on the planet, and he got most of his stuff from other black musicians, but I think there is very few people mention the Beatles, they mention Elvis, they mention a bunch of these people, and yes, they brought that to a broader chunk of America, but I believe that the biggest transition of power in this regard was from Chuck Berry to the Beach Boys, because the Beach Boys, guitar wise, they ripped off everything from Chuck Berry. And Chuck Berry was an innovator, but he took a lot of his rhythm from jazz musicians and infused the rock and roll. which was just beginning to start in both black and white circles. So, I think.
I'd love to get especially Brendan's thoughts on this, but was this project, the shift that you're talking about that happened in the 1950s, did it start in the 20s during Prohibition? I'm not entirely familiar with Prohibition, but I've studied it a little bit, and the one thing that I continually refer back to is, are you familiar with Oversimplified's videos on YouTube?
I think so, but it's been a while.
He does Oversimplified History. They're really fun. They're fantastic. Everybody should go look them up. But he did one on Prohibition, and one of the effects that he talked about after Prohibition had ended was that with the speakeasies and the private bars where everybody was breaking the law, it kind of did away with a lot of the norms that had been established around alcohol. So men didn't drink with women, and then in speakeasies they did. And blacks didn't drink with whites, but in speakeasies they did, because everybody's breaking the law anyway. Why would you care about propriety at that point in time?
Right.
And that was kind of the beginning of a shift of racial relationships.
That was the beginning of jazz.
In the 20s.
Right.
That was the beginning of jazz.
That jazz, rock and roll's roots are jazz and blues. That's really what they are. Blues was particularly more southern sort of situation. Jazz was northern and west coast, but there was influence all around, and there were blues musicians in the north and the west, and there were jazz musicians in the south. But like the main difference being jazz was about adding things where they didn't belong but making them fit. Where and using more upbeat, strange rhythms, things that weren't common. Whereas the whole point of blues was to put your entire heart and soul into every single note and make every single note count. So they're almost diametrically opposed, which is really interesting. But rock and roll actually brought those two aesthetics together, right? And so I'm of the opinion that fusion might not have happened without the speakeasies, but the very earliest rock and roll kind of stuff was a combination of that plus broken electric instruments. Like, I'm not even joking. The first what's considered to be distorted electric guitar rock and roll song, I forget the name of it right off the top of my head, but I can find it and link it maybe if I remember. Our general did remember to link it, so to speak. Well, you can look it up on your own. It's called Rocket 88 by Ike Turner and Jackie Brenston. Look it up on your own time. It's quite the listen. Was literally because the guy's amp broke and fell off their car, the band's car, going down the road. And they went into the recording studio with a broken amp and just said, let's do it anyway. It sounds fine. It's good enough. Let's just do it anyway. And
interesting.
That aesthetic caught on because people were like, how can we make it sound like that? Right? And they ended up modding amps and changing things up and whatever else. Just one moment. Casey's wanting to talk to me.
I promise it's an important interruption.
I figured it was. Yes! All paid off? Fantastic. So we finally got our car repair paid off. So that's good.
Round of applause.
Very much. Anyway, I don't mean to leave you out of this, Brendan, or I don't know how much you know, or if you think I'm just full of it as far as my takes on all this go, or however you are with it. But if you have anything you want to add on the topic or tell me where you're at with all this, let me know.
I mean, I like 1940s music thanks to, ironically, Bendy and the Ink Machine, because DA Games is a YouTube channel that did songs for the video game that included that style and genre. Okay. So I like some of like that sort of genre. But you're talking about things that are way out of my depth. I'm just sort of confused how we got here from time periods being romanticized.
1950s are heavily romanticized.
Maybe.
Speaking in my own conservative, like very conservative political sphere on the internet, very romanticized.
Okay. Fair. Fair. Um, I'm thinking. So when I hear the romanticization of a time period,
Mhm.
I thought, and you mentioned pirates, westerns, things like that in the initial
Knights,
thing.
yeah. Mhm.
Knights. I sort of jumped to that. I wasn't jumping to music.
Sure.
You mentioning music sort of made me sort of look some stuff up, and there are a couple things I didn't know. For example, did you know that Alexander Dumas was born before Beethoven died?
Nice.
I didn't.
I believe I did know that.
I didn't. I don't know who was alive when. It was a thing. But one of the things that I thought I was thinking about, because you're talking about like relatively recent history about romanticization, back as far as I believe it's the 1500s or the 15th century, one of those two. I keep getting them confused with. Sir Thomas Malory wrote Le Mort d'Arthur, which was the death of Arthur. For those of you who don't speak French, well, if you don't speak French, you can't come. If you understand Barbara Manatee, you'll get that joke. But one of the things that was interesting, and it might be a little anachronistic, but one of the things that I was sort of doing as I was during one of my huge Arthur phases, I saw something somewhere that part of the appeal of Arthur, why it was so popular at the time, it was so popular, was the concept of courtly love. And we're talking 1500s here. Like, yeah, knights are in the past at this point. They are. But that idea of this love that is forbidden because I can't marry you because you are married to someone else, but we still love each other. That's still a very powerful thing. So it wasn't so much that the time period was being romanticized, rather the time period was a vehicle through which to bear this theme.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? And so when we hear about time periods being romanticized, I'm not saying that we don't, right? But this is the worldview apologist coming out in me. I think it's less that things are being romanticized for the time period itself. It's like, oh, this is such a great time. And more so that there is a value that we attach to that time period that we love.
Yeah.
And we express it in form of a romanticization of that particular time period.
Right.
So you talk about conservative circles, 1950s, like what was the theme of the conservative political movement during that time? You take that idea and you can slot that idea into a different time period.
Yes.
I can guarantee you can find it and put it somewhere else. But we as a culture have created such a caricature that time period represents that theme that we get latched onto that. The other thing, though, that we need to be careful about, and this is sort of the other side of that, is that when we do that, we have no, that's not true. Back up. Oftentimes when we create pieces that are set in the past, we are talking about the present. The biggest example of this is an Errol Flynn movie called The Privateer, I think. I think that's what it's called. I can't remember. Anyway, older movie that takes place. It's about Errol Flynn's character is a privateer working for the English, the Queen of England.
The Seahawk.
Seahawk, that's it called. Seahawk. During the Spanish and English War. The movie was being produced around 1940, and it was definitely not talking about the Spanish-English War. It was talking about World War II. And if you watch the movie, knowing that, it's so freaking obvious. So, you get things like that. You also get moments where like people are talking anachronistically in a different time period and blah, 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 blah. Basically, it's just I guess the two things I would point out are, one, a time period isn't always a time period. When we romanticize something, and then two, even if a time period is a time period, sometimes the time period is not the time period that we think it is.
Right.
Yeah.
So
That's entirely fair. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I guess why, I think the thing that's individual to the romanticization thing that we're talking about for each time period, right? Bitty, that's all, folks. The way it gets romanticized is slightly different for each one. I think that usually there's a keystone story or two that usually link to a specific theme, like you're saying. I think that the reason that the 1950s have been romanticized is because of, probably I would put two main shows, as at least in my neck of the woods, as the two main stories that everyone latches onto the 50s with, and that's Leave It to Beaver and the Andy Griffith Show. I think everyone kind of has this, Ma and Pop small town America vibe sort of thing from those shows, and it's something that people miss and want. That's the other thing, is nostalgia. I think people still feel nostalgia for ages that they have no direct connection to, such as people who wish that they could be chivalric knights in modern day. Guys who wish that they could be chivalric knights. Women who wish that they could be great objects of beauty and wisdom, such as in the Middle Ages, right? And you feel born out of place, and the whole anachronistic thing, which is crazy and silly for lots of reasons as a Calvinist, but we don't have to go fully deeply into that there. We can if we want to, but my point is that, like, I agree with Brendan. I'd like to get a little bit of it's kind of nailed down a little further on some of the ones that we threw out at the beginning, pirates, knights, whatever we can think of, and how, well, I'd love to touch on how accurate some of them are and how not accurate other ones are, but how did the caricature still do it justice somehow? Like with knights and the medieval period, I think it's unbelievably historically inaccurate and has spawned all kinds of even further caricatures like fantasy, etc. But medieval fantasy and that sort of a thing. But like, as a result, it's almost, I think that's an incredibly accurate caricature as opposed to like the 1950s caricature.
It depends on which caricature you're speaking of.
Right.
Because as far as medieval goes, I'll let the medievalist go.
Well, hold on. Before the medievalist, when I said anachronistic, the example I was specifically thinking of was Wonder Woman. Set in the 1950s, 40s, something like that. 1950s or
World War II, 1940s.
World War
no,
II,
it's World War One.
Okay, World War One,
isn't it?
The original, the first Wonder Woman. Yeah, 1920s. Wonder Woman asks the main male lead what marriage is, and he gives 1941. An answer. Oh, what do you know?
It is 1941?
Yep.
Huh, how odd. They're using
first appearance, 1941, All-Star Comics #8. Anyway.
No, he's talking about the movie.
Movie?
He's talking about the movie. The movie is set in like 1917, the end of World War One.
That. So anyway, go ahead.
It's not bad.
Anyway, in that movie, at one point, Wonder Woman is talking to Chris Pine's character, whose name I can't remember because he's Chris Pine's character. He doesn't serve a purpose other than being female eye candy.
Not unless he's singing agony. Anyway.
Yeah, that too. And she asks him, what is marriage? And he goes, he says something very negative about marriage. This is the 1920s at most. There is no way a person in the 1920s would have that low a view of marriage.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what I mean by anachronistic. You're taking the modern view of marriage and putting it in the wrong time frame. I don't necessarily mean something else. Now, Middle Ages, yes, horribly inaccurate. I'm not sure if that spawns fantasy. I feel like fantasy is less an offshoot of that, if that's what you're thinking, and more of a reaction against it. But okay, well, if this is it, I'm going to make my own thing that's not like that. But you can tell the medieval music movies are inaccurate just by their color palette. Everything is brown, everything is dirty, everything is overcast and gray. I'm sorry, no. We know how many people died doing laundry because the medievals kept very meticulous records. We know how many people died doing laundry. It wasn't because they were incompetent, it was because they were doing laundry a whole lot. They were clean and they were colorful because, gosh darn it, clothing is well, maybe not expensive, but clothing is
difficult to
important.
produce.
It's difficult to produce, so you're going to make something that is colorful because, well, one, if you have wealth, more color the better, but two, also, this is how you declare allegiance. I'm sorry, if I'm on the battlefield and I'm wearing orange and blue, I know not to look for the red and black guy for help. I want to find my fellow orange and blue people.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
Yeah. The like, this is mostly an aesthetic thing, my ramble, right? My rant and Dad's rant, really. It's Dad's rant. I'm just co-opting it for now.
But aesthetics are important.
But aesthetics are incredibly important because I wonder if more movies were aesthetically accurate if Game of Thrones would have been written at all.
That's a great line. Yeah.
Clip it.
Yeah.
Include me yelling, clip it.
Yes, indeed. Hurry, clip it, and we'll be right back for more Poets at War. Attention all Christian writers and creative peoples. Are you searching for a place to share your work and receive encouragement from fellow wordsmiths? Look no further than the Broodcast. Inspired by the legendary Inklings of old, a group of writers who banded together during the Second Great War. The Broodcast is your monthly gathering for inspiration, fellowship, and critique. Join us as we share our stories and support our fellow soldiers on our creative missions. Enlist in the Broodcast community today at joshuadavidling.com/brood. Travel cyberspace. Serve the greatest cause. Join the ranks of the Brood today.
Imagine if you had everything Tolkien ever wrote. Well, you can't have his, but you can have mine. The Ling Lyricanium is $10 a month, and you can find it at joshuadavidling.com/LL. That's joshuadavidling.com/LL.
I'm Ian Wilson, and I create graphic art using primarily traditional methods, supplementing with digital where it's needed. I use a real pen, a real paper, a real graphite to make my art. I like to feel my art. I've always been this way. I love the feeling of a pen or pencil in my hand, the sound of graphite scratching paper, and I love the sight of a nice black line making its way across the page. So why choose traditional art over digital? Traditional art has an organic, natural quality that seems to be missing from most digital illustrations. The illustrated books and comics that were made in the days before digital have an excellence and staying power that is just as vibrant now as it was decades ago. These are the stories that stay with you. Dr. Seuss, Winnie the Pooh, Where the Wild Things Are. People still read these. I'm currently working on my own graphic novel series, Legend of the Swordbearer, and I've also had the privilege to draw graphics for 2 motion comic series, along with illustrations for a small magazine, Logosophia magazine, and various book covers. Don't let traditional art fade into the dust. Help me keep it alive. You won't regret it. Visit my website at ianthomaswilson.com for more info.
We now return to Poets at War.
That's absolutely correct, though, because he's working with caricatures of caricatures of caricatures that are so far away from accurate to any time period at all that they bear no resemblance to reality. But because we're all nihilists now, it resonates really deeply with people because they're like, oh yes, that's exactly how real life was back then.
And that is why a genre that is popular reflects more about what the current people value rather than what it is.
Yeah,
I did a quick lookup of pirates, not to pivot away from medieval, but I wanted to jump the gun on this because pirates is the most obvious. What's the most popular pirate movie?
Pirates
of the Caribbean.
Yeah,
came out in 2003.
Mm-hmm.
That's 2 years after 2001.
Mm-hmm.
September 11th, 2001. Now, movies take a while to make, but not all of them take like 2 years. Like The Lord of the Rings is a special case. But that's because Lord of the Rings is a special case in literally every subject. There's a reason it got 13 Oscars. But I wonder if the Pirates movies became so popular as a pushback against authority. Like the romanticization of I sail the seas, I am free, I do what I will, and I am not beholden to a system, except possibly a system that I chose to be a part of. But even that system I can abandon at any moment in time. Basically, they're Congregationalists. Sorry, was that my outside voice? No. But the idea that like that's what I think of when I hear like the Pirates movie. And don't get me started about how people write revisionist history after these, but whatever.
Yeah, and you're absolutely. This goes back to what you said after we did our tangent on music, which is that nostalgia or the romanticized time periods are basically able to be boiled down to a concept. So what is the concept that they find appealing here? What is the concept that they find appealing here? And then they just use we just use the time period as a vehicle for that concept. And you're saying the same thing, except for except for consciously. Is that right? You're saying that they're consciously using the trappings of a different period to get their message through on...
I'm not sure it's conscious.
In this?
I'm not necessarily sure it's conscious. I think the reason Pirates resonated so much was because there was this cultural dissatisfaction with the war in Iraq, with how little we got done over the amount of time we were there. And so that's how they became popular. And then the writers took that success and they kept writing in a similar vein. I don't necessarily think they were going, oh, I'm going to write a movie that's going to upset the system or that's going to have themes about upsetting the system. I honestly think they were trying to write a good story. I don't think they succeeded with Pirates 2, but that's a different argument altogether.
They wrote a fun story, though. You can't deny that.
Yeah, I can't think of a single character in Pirates 2 that I like.
Okay, but Davy Jones... Davy Jones standing in a bucket without footsteps leading up to the bucket.
That's Pirates 3, not Pirates 2.
Oh, that's 3. Fair enough.
Yeah, 2
Pirates 3 is people give it credit for.
Yeah, 3 is better than 2 because they could only go up.
It has way more gravitas and less slapstick. But
and it ends in a marriage, which I'm a sucker for.
Yeah. So, also I just had to point out that this isn't just concept. What were you saying, Alex? Concept, like they were doing this purposefully or not kind of thought process.
Intentionally, intentionally using the time period as a vehicle for the concept that they were trying to say.
I think some people do that
because they saw images of it there.
Right. I think some people do that. I think some people don't do that. It just depends. But, you know, we've had the AI conversation many times, and one of the things people are so innately disgusted by is the idea that you can, you know, have something generate something, and it gets further and further away from the thing that it originally was based on. We do that too, not just the machines.
Oh, yeah.
Exhibit A,
Yeah, mhm.
Exhibit A, Pastafarianism. The Flying
Yeah.
Spaghetti Monster came out in 2005. That whole movement started in 2005 on the heels of what? Pirates of the Caribbean. I just wanted to point that out. So we do the war in Iraq as pirates, and then we get Flying Spaghetti Monster. just saying, like, this happens, you know.
It's the culture of no. That's when the fight the system became popular, and I'm kind of leaning on pirates being fight the system. I'm really not married to that idea, but it's the closest thing I can think of for why that genre would be so popular. But they're even my comment about rewriting history, right? Jack Sparrow in the second Pirates movie, when Bennett is talking with him, he says something like, "You had a simple job. Bring the cargo to the location," and Jack says, "People aren't cargo, mate." So the reason Jack became a pirate, canonically, is because he didn't ship slaves or ship people.
Right.
So we're taking even the people who, like, because pirates, I'm sorry, they weren't necessarily good guys. And, you know, you have all these people talking about, oh, well, pirates actually had democracy. They voted for who their captain was and blah, 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 blah. And I'm sitting here going, citation needed. But you know, even if that's true, there's not a guarantee that they wouldn't trade slaves. You know?
Historical accuracy of privateers in general is a little sus no matter where you go with it, whether you're saying they were all bad guys or all good guys, because quite frankly, there were some military victories won by privateers that would have never been able to be won by many other people. Now, regardless of whether or not you agree with that country's politics or not, is a whole other thing, right? And then there's the independent privateers who did things for themselves that I don't necessarily think were wrong in doing it for themselves, you know, depending on the situation, because they were a country unto themselves at that point. You know,
yes, it is more complicated, but the universal lumping of it's back to what we have talked about in the past, where if the only example of something that you see is either positive or negative, it's making a statement about that thing in the medium itself.
Yep.
I'm not saying whether or not the privateers were right or wrong in every instance. That's not what my goal is. What I'm saying is they are making the pirates look like good guys.
Right.
In the Pirates movies.
Right, yes, absolutely. Yeah. And see, they started with one, and then they made more to join him, because you need an ensemble cast in this kind of situation. You need some protagonists. But then it becomes the whole entire pirate world versus, like, and it got a little
versus
silly.
The system,
right? Yeah, versus the system, exactly. So it got a little silly, but you know, they were like you said, they were trying to prove their point, and everyone's trying to prove their point as a storyteller. That's something that we do, but some do it well, and some try to do it subtly out of the leaf mold of their mind. And it just depends on how good you are as an artist as to how well you can do that. But I think, you know, why did Pirates of the Caribbean become Pirates of the Caribbean? Because everyone else is kind of feeling it too, in one sense or another, I'd say. Regardless of whether you're conservative or not, you know, conservative, liberal, doesn't really matter. There was some shenanigans going on at high levels, and everyone felt like they were, well, who do we trust, right? Like, that's basically the whole thrust of Pirates too. Who do we trust? That's the entire thrust of Pirates 2.
Yeah, 2006.
Yeah. So, but going back to, we talked that. What about Old West? What do we make of that? What do we make of, I think there's some obvious things, but I think there's some not so obvious things. And Old West isn't just cowboys and gunslingers, although that's the first thing we usually think of. It's also Little House on the Prairie. It's the Oregon Trail. It's, all these sorts of things too. The wilderness, the wild wilderness. So like,
the Old West. You mean Ronin samurai movies? No.
Well, how do two?
That is one.
But see, most
The Last Samurai is a Western.
Well, I'm saying that even with that, we've got two very different time periods. That people associate with each other for a lot of reasons. A lot of reasons that people see parallels, whether they're artists or not, right? And so I'd argue that one's declining and one's ascending, but you've still got similar stuff happening. Why is that? What are we latching onto with that? What do you guys think?
I think they have an idea, at least from a more male perspective, as to why we seem to latch on to the Old West, and that is because this is from synthesizing a thought from the Daily Wire, one of the Daily Wire backstage shows. That's their best show. If anybody's a fan of the Daily Wire, backstage is their best show. But Boring said something along the lines of, we look back to the Wild West because that was the last time that men could be men for the good. That men were allowed to go out and take over and conquer for the good. That's what I think, and that resonates with me. That saying, okay, well, there's a bunch of land over there. We should go take it over. We should go take it over and civilize it.
Right.
And then you have really interesting interplay of those concepts with the last two great Westerns of The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance and High Noon, which are arguing polar opposite points inside of the same narrative.
Is that the same reason we like and associate people like John McClane in the Die Hard movies with the Old West? Even though he's a cop, the fact is, the dirty cops, we like those guys. The dirty cop movies, the buddy cop movies where I lost my partner, got to do this off the books. That whole trope, right? Like, which isn't a romanticization technically, but it's because it's not really tied to a specific time period other than the 20th century. But like,
and it also happened in the 70s, whenever Law and Order became a big thing that people.
I think that's when it started to really. Yeah, I think that's when it really started to catch on. But even before, you had stuff like that in the Humphrey Bogart days. They did stories like that on occasion. So, yeah, I think you're right in that regard. I think there's also the Taming of Eden in general, kind of a thing is just a big theme, with the pioneers and whatever else. But I think that how do we get from those big concepts to Woody's Roundup?
So right? I kind of want to, well, I don't know Woody's Roundup. Let me start off with that. But
Toy Story.
Springboarding off the back. Oh. I'm springboarding off of the back of what Alexander was saying about the last time men can be men for the good.
Right.
I sent a meme to the host chat that I think summarizes why the West is so one of the core tenets of the West. And I don't know if you're going to show it, Joshua, but it's
I am.
Okay. Then all y'all can read it, but I won't have to do the crying Wojak voice, thankfully.
Well, I'll read it just for audio people.
Okay.
This guy goes, "You're just trying to lift weights, read old books, buy land, raise a loving family, and ignore the news forever?" Yes.
Yeah. And
Giga Chad
so
with family and all that.
Giga Chad
Yeah.
with a family, and here's the thing, like, I don't know. Again, we're talking like you know. Yeah, I find it really interesting, Joshua, that you mentioned. Yeah, we've got the gunslingers and the western and the heists and the Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kids, and then you've got Little House on the Prairie.
Mm-hmm.
You've got Australia, which is a great 2 movies. Why didn't they make it 2 movies? You've got, you know,
Zorro.
these Zorro. Yeah, I could see. Well,
Zorro's Old West, bro. It's literally California in the exact same time period, and it's the exact same story of a gunslinger desperado saving the day. He just happens to be a little bit more Spanish and a little more superhero.
Yeah, and he uses a sword. Okay, sure. I'll take it. I'll take it. I won't. I'm not gonna fight it. But you know, you've got these, right? And it's with the Little House on the Prairie, you have the building of a family and making it's dominion.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
In a sense, it's the dominion mandate of go subdue the land, the earth, and fill it. And with Zorro, with the westerns, you've got also a subdue the land, but in this case, it's subdue evil,
right?
And bring it to heel. And so, it's you get this interesting question of how do you go from the concept to like Woody, but I would argue that Woody isn't. He's a caricature, but he's not a caricature of the West. He's a caricature of the old. Buzz Lightyear represents new.
Right.
And he is the old desperately trying to cling on and get rid of the new. He is the Luddite. He is the person who doesn't want the organ to be put into place because the hurdy-gurdy is superior. He is the person who doesn't want electric guitars in church. That's what Woody is. Woody isn't the West.
Right.
So, I mean, but that's just being weird. Anyway.
Well, I'm saying, though, we can recognize the West in Woody through the aesthetics and through the time period that they set the character in the TV show in Toy Story 2, right?
Sure.
We can recognize all of that, while at the same time, is it just we don't care any longer that the high concept of the West matters, and then we put something else on it, like you said, the old. But yet we still know it as the West, and I think it's more than just aesthetics. Like, you can't have the obsolete without it being without the romanticization of the Old West being an obsolete sort of man person, the idea of dominion being obsolete. Do you kind of see what I'm saying? It's not actually obsolete.
But the idea...
But that's why people resonate with The Last Gunslinger, The Last Samurai, right?
Well, The Last Samurai is just a darn good movie. But
it is a good movie.
But even if Tom Cruise is in it. But I mean, I see kind of what you're saying, except that I don't think necessarily. I think that the trappings of the West were a convenience, rather than a statement about the West itself, because you could have, like, I could easily, in fact, I'm sure it's been done, see the same plot of Toy Story 2, but you swap out, or the same dynamic of Toy Story 2 with Buzz Lightyear and Zurg, whatever.
Zurg,
being the other, the other evil that is sort of the chaos that's fighting the issue. And instead of the West, it's the church. Woody is a priest. The prospector, who's ultimately the villain at the end of Toy Story 2, is a cardinal or a pope or something like that. And
Bishop.
Bishop, sure. And Buzz is a scientist friend of Woody, and they were pals together before Woody as a church had to go to a gathering in a faraway place, and the scientist figures out, wait a minute, this thing that the very premise that they're meeting on is wrong. I need to tell them. I need to help this. And turns out the Pope knew the whole time that the premise was wrong, but he was just using it to manipulate. It doesn't matter. The fact that it's a Western, they're saying, I don't think they're saying specifically in that instance that the Westerns are obsolete necessarily. What they're saying, there's just that Woody happened to be a Western character, and so they're like, well, we can do more with this. Let's just throw in other characters. We've got the female cowboy and the prospector, and those are the 2 extra characters from that setting. Cool. Yay. Moving on. I might be wrong. I haven't seen Toy Story 2 in ages.
You should. It's good. It's really good.
Toy Story 2 is fantastic.
Yeah.
For the longest time, it was the highest rated movie on IMDb. Highest rated movie on Rotten Tomatoes until 2017 when Lady Bird beat it out. But no. I was wanting to bring this up in our Star Wars episode, but I didn't get the chance to.
Throwback.
Star Wars was the end of Westerns. Would we agree with that? That Star Wars marked a sea change in popular movies. It was happening before, but Star Wars was the big thing that shifted the popular movie from Western to sci-fi.
I would argue that it was twofold. You're talking the genre movie specifically, but even there was a period where even the regular everyday run-of-the-mill show and movie were Western themed. Like everything was Western themed. And so I would argue for the genre movie, it became Star Wars. For the regular run-of-the-mill movie, the thing that changed it was Rocky.
Yeah.
So I just want to make that distinction, because Western covered everything for a while.
Yeah, it did. But as far as the Toy Story, I'm going to speak of Toy Story 1 instead of Toy Story 2. As far as that goes, is it working? I could just be high on something right now, but is it possible that it's talking in some way, shape, or form about Star Wars? Because Star Wars was not the Arthur C. Clarke 2001 hard sci-fi stuff.
Oh, it definitely
Star Wars
is.
was fantasy. Star Wars was Westerns set in the trappings of that. And is that kind of the same themes that Toy Story 1 is playing with, where you have the Western and the sci-fi learning to become friends and melding together into a single cohesive unit? Am I crazy?
No, you're
not. Am I
not.
hallucinating?
No, that's absolutely the case.
Well, I mean, you might be crazy, but this isn't a sign of it.
Thank you.
I just looked something up. A show criminally underrated, in my opinion. Sharp, starring Sean Bean, and he lives the whole time. I know, it's amazing. It is basically a Western. Now that I'm thinking about it, it is
Sharp,
a British
S-H-A-R-P?
S-H-A-R-P-E.
Got it.
Is a British television drama series starring Sean Bean as Richard Sharp, a fictional British soldier in the Napoleonic Wars. It is British, so it may not actually be really Western, but given the color palette and the fact that they're firing guns a lot, it's got a Western. There are definitely parallels for the Western thing. And yes, Sharp, I'm pretty sure, was based on a book series, but
Haven't read the book, can't comment on it.
Still, it's actually really good. I would recommend. There is some there's drama.
Content.
There is content. There is content that is dramatic and both in the oh my gosh, that's a good story, and in why is his wife cheating on him?
Right.
But anyway. So yeah. But yeah, no, I think I didn't realize how ubiquitous Westerns were, really. But again, now we're talking about the question of how do you define a Western? Because is a Western just the look of a Western, or is a Western the theme and the story of a Western? And that's sort of a joke I made at the beginning with do you mean Ronin movies?
Right. Well, I mean, you can have a night movie, a medieval night movie set in the future. Like, you can do that.
Yeah.
You can have a fantasy in space, Star Wars. You can have all kinds of these things in another place and setting, but the thing that they get tied back to is a real, actual period in history, as caricatured as it possibly can be. That's why I think that these things are so interesting, because, and this was the other thing I wanted to get into, is why is it that, what would you say, about 4th century to, 12th, 13th century, right?
Yeah, 1200s.
Yeah. Why is that period all lumped together for one? And then second, why is it that it stops there before we get a whole lot of extra artillery? I mean, we still have that whole period of the Reformation. I almost never see any movies made during that period. Military wise, that was not considered a romantic period of history in any way, shape, or form. It's largely looked on as almost anti-romantic. There's other periods like that in history. The Napoleonic Wars are looked at similarly. You can look at even though there are Vietnam movies, they are usually placed in a more anti-romantic manner in the way that they're portrayed. There are these periods of ingloriousness in history that aren't looked upon as big bastions of amazingness. We can look at even just recently, like I said, Vietnam, World War II, right? They are portrayed so unbelievably differently. I think that there is difference to look at in both of those, but there's a lot of similarities too, because they're so close together in history. I think we forget sometimes that that's like, what, 25, 30 years apart?
Yeah.
Right? Like,
there is a really significant chance that looking back at the 20th century from, the 2800s, they'll just say, oh yeah, from 1915 or 1913, whenever World War I started, to 2038.
Right.
Yeah, that was the World War.
Right.
Whenever everybody was at war with everybody all the time.
Right.
With a couple of 10-year respites in between.
Right. And a whole lot of hedonistic craziness. Right.
Yeah.
But like,
so
yeah. But I'm saying, why are some periods heralded and other periods not? I think there's a lot of reasons for different periods, but yeah, why are they derided? Well, not even derided. Like, Vietnam's derided, but Reformation, when it comes to an artistic perspective, is just not touched on, like, almost ever. It's not considered aesthetically pleasing to do anything in that category in that time period. There is no romanticization of it at really much at all.
I'll let Brendan go. I'm not going to forget this. So.
Well, I think you've got like 3 things going on here, and 2 of them are connected. First of all, Vietnam and World War II are vilified because, one, I think it's relatively recent history, and because they were, like you said, they were so close together. post, especially Vietnam, there was a huge anti-war push. And so you got the relative problem of recent history where now war is bad. War is not good. War is not something to glorify. You can glorify individual soldiers, Hacksaw Ridge as example.
Right.
You know, where they glorify that guy who, frankly, he deserves it. But
1917, fictionalized, but still the same thing.
You can do things like that, but if you're talking about the time period itself, you can't glorify that because the narrative is so ugly by its very nature that they are like, we don't want to touch this. You've got the Holocaust in World War II. If you make a World War II movie and not touch any element of the Holocaust, you could be labeled as a Holocaust denier. And that's you don't want to go there. You know?
But people still
and
make
Vietnam,
Civil War movies, and even though it's considered it's sort of in the derided vein, there is a romanticism all the same to that time period, right? Is it literally just because the slaves were freed? I don't get, because something was accomplished.
That might be it, but honestly, I don't know that many Civil War movies.
Gods and Generals.
Gods and Generals, yeah.
Gods and Generals.
Remember the Titans?
No, we're not doing that one. We're not
Abraham Lincoln.
Abraham Lincoln, okay.
Or Lincoln,
but that would follow along the same lines of Hacksaw Ridge. I would
Abraham
argue,
Lincoln,
following
Vampire
a
Hunter,
character,
or whatever it's called.
That is hilarious, and we shall include it as canon in real life now. No, but okay, so that's one side. I think you've got the ugliness of the current recent events and the just negative milieu of that. But the other side is, I think we just don't remember our history.
Yeah,
because I was going to say the
century.
Reformation, a lot was accomplished, whether or not you agree with it or not. It's not like the Catholics have a giant hold on the entertainment industry, right?
All I've got is Luther for the Reformation.
Cromwell is a fantastic movie. That's about it.
But here's the thing: we're talking about 4th century. Let's just sort of look
Lady
it up real
Jane
quick.
Grey. It's okay.
8301. The only movie I can think of that takes place during the historically that was made, and I'm not talking about the recent Rome show,
right,
was Spartacus with Stanley Kubrick. And yeah, Spartacus was okay, but Spartacus was so I'm sorry, maybe it's just I'm sure it was great at the time it came out, but looking back on it now, it's so kind of bland plot wise.
Yeah,
it's just okay,
300.
this happened. 300, but that's the thing. That's
300 is BC.
If you are going to do a movie about a historical time frame or a historical moment, it has to be hyper stylized.
Right.
And that's what's so interesting. Anyway, Alexander, you had something you wanted to say way back when, and you said you wouldn't forget it.
Yeah, as far as Reformation goes, I agree. I can't think of any movies that take place in there. You have Luther, you have Cromwell,
and Lady
Jane Grey,
which is decent. It has some nude scenes with Helena Bonham Carter, so I can't fully recommend it. But the actual, you take that out, which is there's no point to it anyway. It's generally good portrayal of Lady Jane Grey. So anyway, but yeah, go ahead.
But recently, very recently, last year, there was a video game that came out that takes place during the Reformation by, in my opinion, the best game studio working today, Obsidian, called Pentiment. It is extremely interesting. It is a very deep RPG. It's very short. It's AA, but AA, not AAA. But it's really, really good, and it actually deals with the themes of the Reformation as it affects one specific town. And the entire game takes place over 30 years.
Where geographically is this town, may I ask?
Germany.
Which part of Germany?
It is in the countryside of Germany. Northern Germany.
So Bavaria.
I can find the town. Yes.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. Anyway, go ahead.
It's very good.
Yeah, Brendan.
So kind of going back to what I was saying earlier, we don't know our history. I hate to be I don't hate to do this because, Joshua, you do it all the time. The church always leads the charge with any cultural thing, either positive or negative.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And I'm sorry, who are the Desert Fathers and why should I care?
Bingo.
We don't know. From my understanding of church history is Jesus dies, raised from the dead, Acts through Timothy, and then the Reformation.
Right.
Yep.
Oh, there's persecution in Rome for a bit, and then the Reformation.
And you might, if you have a really good church, get some Athanasius and some Augustine, and some things of that nature.
Aquinas.
Maybe Polycarp's, a little bit of Polycarp's story, stuff like that.
A couple names here and there.
Right.
But who are the Desert Fathers and why should I care? But here's the thing. Like, there's a guy on video who did like TikTok, YouTube Shorts. He wears a Roman helmet and he talks like this, and he always starts when this thing. Yeah, he does something about Moses the Ethiopian.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sitting here going, I'm sorry. He was Moses the Ethiopian, and the guy calls him a Desert Father. I don't know if that's technically accurate, but whatever. Even if he is, I want a movie about this guy's story. I'm sorry. Well, that's cool.
Not to mention, there has been one Hollywood movie with John Knox in it, and he's a villain.
Yeah. What movie?
I don't remember the name of it. It was done in like the 50s or 40s or something like that. I'd have to look it up and find it. But there's been like one with John Knox. And John Knox had one of the most action-packed, awesome lives that would put William Wallace's actual historical life to shame.
But that's the thing. The church is the villain in Hollywood.
Mm-hmm.
I would argue because the church doesn't know its own bloody history.
And the church didn't take care of Hollywood.
And the church didn't.
Yeah, I was going to say, and the church screwed up Hollywood by leaving it. Yeah.
But that's the thing. Like, if you have a people who know their history, you can't go woke on them.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Because if you do, you alienate them.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I've been editing Scott Klusendorf videos, and so
dude, you nailed
he's been
it.
Talking about wokeism.
It's okay.
So,
you nailed the point home, and I definitely want to continue the conversation. But this is the best point that I think we can probably have to end it. So I'm gonna say, learn your history, be your family's bard. Do not turn to the right or to the left, and the Lord will be with you wherever you go. We'll see you next time. Next week, we're going to be talking Maid Marian from Robin Hood and the general Robin Hood story. We'll see you next time in the trenches on Poets at War.
and history will turn up then too, because I have opinions on Robin Hood.